In your book, you share your stories, you talk about your life, especially as mayor. What I loved is there's an anecdote about you sitting at the desk for the first time thinking, wow, it's day one. What do I do? Where do I begin?
Yeah.
What would your day one be as president? You know, Obama said, I'm going to go for healthcare. I'm going to shut down Guantanamo. Trump said, I'm here to build a wall. Everyone has the idea of day one. None of them seem to achieve it, but everyone has the idea of day one. What is your day one as president?
I think day one, you launch a package of democratic reforms to strengthen our democracy. Some things that I think we could achieve in the first year, the kinds of things that were in H.R. 1 that the House passed, but that's going to go to the Senate and die there, making voter registration easier, making it easier to get to the polls, but also launching things that are going to take years to achieve. Launching a reform to the Electoral College based on the idea that you might say is simplistic, that you ought to give the presidency to whoever gets the most votes.
Right.
Launching a commission to propose measures that would depoliticize the Supreme Court. I mean, big, deep structural reforms that need to happen, right? Not because I'm under any illusion that they can get done in the first few days or even in the first few years, some of these things, but really to remind everybody that one of the most elegant features of our constitutional system is that it's designed to be capable of self-healing and reform. There have been periods when we've not been afraid to have a number of structural reforms. In the 60s and 70s, you saw change to the voting age, you saw the 25th Amendment, even though the ERA sadly didn't make it, having that fight led to things like Title IX. And then we've been in a drought of structural reforms. Not much has changed. And so when we do have a change to structures, it's usually in a very cynical way. So for example, a lot's been made of this idea of Supreme Court reform, as though our side of the aisle are the only ones who are talking about changing the court. Republicans changed the number of justices on the Supreme Court. They changed it to 8 until they took power again, and then they changed it back to 9. I would like these kinds of changes to happen not in an opportunistic shattering of norms for one party to get their way, but through a systematic set of structural reforms that will make our democracy stronger for the balance of my lifetime. Because every other issue that's so urgent, from, I think, climate tops the list, but climate, income inequality, education, gun reform, immigration, you name it, is going to be very hard to deal with if we still have such warping of our democratic system itself.
It's interesting that you have these ideas that connect with, obviously, Democratic voters, but you have the challenge of selling some of these ideas and the idea of your presidency to people who may be in the middle or have voted for Trump. And you know, some of the people who voted for Obama went on to vote for Trump. People have shown that they can switch their affiliations. Yeah. How do you sell some of those ideas to somebody in the heartland? If somebody's a Trump supporter and you say to them the Electoral College is something that needs to be changed, how do you sell that type of idea to somebody who feels like or has been indoctrinated to believe that those are their ideas?
Yeah. I mean, some of it's just plain English. So saying, like, in a democracy, don't you think the way we ought to pick our president is to give it to the person who gets the most votes? Some of it, I mean, that shouldn't be...
That seems very simple.
Yeah.
It's so simple that I don't trust it. Something's weird.
And, you know, what I've found, because we have a lot of people where I live who did that. They voted for Obama and for Trump. Many of them also voted for Mike Pence for governor and me for mayor. And one of the things that shows you is that it's not all about ideology. I think a lot of people want to know, they may have values and ideas. They also just want to know what these ideas mean in their life. And so part of that's when we're talking about our democracy, that we're all better off in a better democracy, but also when we're talking about something like healthcare. Climate change, a great example where I'm afraid still that when we think about climate change, our mental imagery around it is usually something from the Arctic, right? It's a polar bear looking for a habitat. It's a piece of ice falling off the ice sheet. When I'm thinking about climate change, I'm thinking about neighborhoods in South Bend, in my Midwestern city, devastated by 2 historic floods, a 1,000-year flood and a 500-year flood, that happened less than 2 years apart. So saying, look, this is a safety issue for you and me, not something that's just happening out there in the atmosphere, out there in the Arctic, but in our homes, in our neighborhoods, where Nebraska's underwater, California's catching fire, South Bend's at risk of greater floods. And the more we can make it concrete like that, the more it's not only politically effective, but I also think philosophically better. Because if we can't explain or validate a policy in terms of how it's going to make our everyday personal lives actually better,
right,
then why are we even out here?
Let me ask you about the Mike Pence versus Pete Buttigieg. It seems like it started out of nowhere for many people. You know, it seemed Mayor Pete came out, that's you by the way, came out and said, you know, if Mike Pence has a problem with me, he should take it up with my creator. And this has turned into a conversation in and around religion in America. You have an interesting idea, and that is that for a long time, people on the right have claimed religion,
Right.
but you believe that there's a religious left, and religion as a whole is something that people can be interpreting differently.
Right.
How do you sell that message, and do you believe that on the left, religion is as strong as it is on the right?
I think it absolutely can be. I think there's a great tradition of the religious left that's not getting enough attention. I mean, you look at the civil rights movement, which is certainly a product of the religious left in some senses. You look at the work that's going on right now in order to help lift up the conditions from immigrants at the border to poor people across this country. And what I think it signals to us is we've got to do away with this idea that the only way you could think about the implications of religion in politics is from a right-wing perspective. Now, I'm careful when I talk about this because anybody in the political space, I think, has an obligation to be there for people of any religion and of no religion. But I also can't miss the fact that when I'm in church and I'm hearing about Scripture about taking care of the least among us and humbling yourself and visiting the prisoner and taking care of the stranger
Right.
and lifting up the poor, that has some political implications, and they are radically different from the behavior of conservatives who present themselves as religious.
That's just as one of the conversations that has followed you on the trail recently. It's been you and Mike Pence. More recently, you've been thrust into the news in and around issues regarding voters who are black. You know, people have said, Mayor Pete, it feels like you have a blind spot when it comes to black voters in America. You know, whether it be the fact that in South Bend, when South Bend's economy rose up, black people didn't rise up as much. You know, they stayed in poverty. You know, you've had issues in and around conversations around the black police chief. What do you think you're going to do, or how are you going to appeal to black voters and connect with them? Because, I mean, everyone has an area where they're strongest when they're running for president. Today you met with Reverend Al Sharpton. Did you garner any knowledge, or is there any idea that you would change in how you communicate with black voters specifically?
Well, I think a lot of it's the importance of outreach. So there are people who will find their way to you, and those are your core supporters. And then there are the people who will never hear from you unless you reach out to them. And it's one of the reasons why we're in South Carolina, for example, in a couple of days, and we'll really be proactively making sure we're engaging, whether through the faith community or in other ways, with black voters and black neighborhoods. This was important for me back home, too. Not everybody knows that South Bend is a racially diverse city. We're about 45% non-white. And I prided myself on winning re-election in minority districts as well as whiter districts.
Right.
But that happened through a lot of lessons learned the hard way. As you mentioned, we had some very painful issues, especially in my first days and months as mayor, around race and policing, around neighborhoods. We have a lot of racial inequality in our city, not because we want to, but it's shown me that good intentions are not enough. You have to have intention around your policies. And we're working on everything back in South Bend, from black entrepreneurship to investing in historically disinvested neighborhoods. I think the same thing has to happen at the national level. Look, these racial inequities didn't just happen. They're not an accident. They're in many cases the consequence of racist policies, which means we have to have not just non-racist policies, but anti-racist policies if we're ever going to see these things equalize in our lifetime. And I may not be able to convince every voter out there to be for me, but at the very least, I need to make sure that every voter out there knows that I'm for them.
It's interesting that you say that, and you've commented so much on policies and ideas that you would have for the nation. Because recently, you know, you took flack, I think it was at the CNN town hall, where it was Anderson Cooper who said to you, hey, you are one of the only or one of the few candidates who does not have any policy on their website. And then your response was, well, I don't want to inundate people with the minutia of policy. What does that mean per se? And you know, does that mean you don't trust that people will be able to handle the ideas of policy, or do you think that policy is not as important as people think it is?
So I think every candidate has an obligation to present the details of our policy. I've sought to do that in kind of Q&A format, but I recognize that we'll want to continue doing that in written format, whether it's things that we'll be adding to the website or things that we'll be putting out in policy addresses on specific issues. What I'm getting at when I say this, though, is that we need to make sure we don't get trapped at the level of policy design without also talking at a higher level about the values that motivate our policies, and at a ground level about what those policies mean.
Give me an idea of what that means.
Well, so for example, on education, I believe some very technical things need to happen. Like, right now when you get student loan debt forgiven on income-based repayment, that's taxable, and I don't think it should be. We'd be better off if it weren't. Stuff like that. Technical but meaningful. But the biggest thing we need to do around education is have a Secretary of Education who believes in public education. So
you're saying focus more on the values.
So I want to make sure that we start
okay.
at the broad strokes so that people, when we get into the more technical stuff, and we will, that it's understood where that's coming from and how it all fits together, instead of just presenting all the technicalities and expecting people to be able to kind of guess or derive what our values must be by looking at all these bullet points in our white papers. It's not that I'm against having the white papers. It's that I want to make sure that we lead with our values so people can put the papers in context.
When you speak to voters who are concerned about your experience or lack thereof, you know, you hear echoes within the Democratic Party or whether it's centrists who say, you know, this Mayor Pete guy's great. He talks a good game, but I mean, does he have the experience of Joe Biden? Does he have the experience of Kamala Harris or Cory Booker? He doesn't, and I'm worried about that lack of experience. How do you respond to that?
I actually think experience is one of the best reasons to vote for me. I know that sounds a little cheeky at my age, but the experience of being a mayor, I think, of a city of any size, but especially in the strong mayor system we have in Indiana, where there's no city manager, for example. You are dealing with these issues up close and personal every day, whether it's homelessness or poverty or race and policing. You're not debating them in a committee. You are having to manage them. I mean, one minute we could be dealing with an economic development puzzle about incentives for somebody who's saying they're going to add jobs, and the next minute we're having a Parks and Recreation controvery over moving a duck pond. And then that's when you get the call that there's been a racially...
Did you move the duck pond?
We're working on it, yeah. Yeah. That's a long story, but it's got to move. The ducks will be better off. Just when you're having a good laugh about that is when the phone call comes in about a racially explosive officer-involved shooting where you don't even have all the facts, and you got to figure out what to say on television to try to hold the community together. And what you learn is that the job has not just a policy element, not just a management element, but also this intangible part, the moral part of just calling people to their highest values. That's actually probably the thing we're most grievously missing right now in the White House. And we really need it. It really matters.
Well, look, one thing I've always enjoyed about you from the beginning is you're not afraid to jump into the sticky side of conversation. And I've always appreciated your ability to take a step back and go like, oh yeah, maybe I could change that or evolve. The book is fascinating. Your campaign is proving to be as fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me.
The memoir, Shortest Way Home, is available now. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, everybody.